I'll just like...
The Barnes & Noble Union Square on this dark and stormy night. But let me tell you what a devoted group of fans you are. A lot of authors wouldn't have had a crowd tonight, but give yourselves a round of applause. I'm the event host here at Union Square, and I'd like to welcome you to our home. Obviously, you know the gentleman standing right here. He is our discussion partner tonight. He is the New York Times best-selling author of the Demon Cycle series, which has sold more than 2.5 million copies around the world. His novels... His novels include The Warded Man, The Desert Spear, The Skull Throne, and he has a new release, Baron. If you need a signed copy, we have some for you over the entrance on your way out. And he has a new graphic novel, Red Sonja Unchained. So a big round of applause for... And then, of course, the man of the hour. He is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of Red Rising.
Actually late coming out because we were already starting the discussion behind the tables.
Yeah, sorry, I
worried about
it.
Talk.
Yeah. So I hear you are the Hasselhoff of Germany. In the literary world.
I am far more famous in Germany than I am anywhere else in the world.
I thought you were going to say far more famous than Hasselhoff.
Well, I haven't been drunk on the floor eating a burger yet, so
we can all dream, you know.
Yeah. I aspire to something.
It's America. We can all have that moment.
Thank you everyone for coming out. Like, the Howlers have really earned their stripes tonight. It's like Ragnarok out there tonight. Half of me is completely drenched, the other half is completely dry. I'm like Two-Face. And super psyched to see Pierce. Like, we don't get to see each other nearly enough.
No, there's relationships broken down. We just flirt on Twitter.
The love is gone. So we've got a lot to talk about, but first, you've been on tour for what, 10 days now?
I think so. I kind of entered a fugue state. Yeah, you know, they all kind of blend together, and I'm pretty bad, and I think the publicists are a little frustrated. Sometimes, sorry, because I look at what's one thing ahead of me on the schedule, so I'm kind of like the horse with blinders on.
No,
so I'm excited I had an event tonight. Yeah, I didn't know about this 20 minutes ago.
How is your packed food? Like how many days can you get out of a carry-on and a personal item?
I pretty much only like 2 pairs of jeans.
Do you check luggage?
Yeah, I check luggage, yeah. I know, it's bold. But it's a good way to get to know your driver. Just make sure who's driving, you know? Yeah, because sometimes you don't know. It's kind of interesting.
I don't trust the check. When you're traveling so much, like, there's always the chance that you're gonna miss a flight, that you're gonna get a sudden change, and so I have my bags with me at all times. I can get 12 days out of a carry-on.
You are a far more responsible human being than I am, because you also make outlines, and these still are foreign to me.
So we can segue right into that.
I'm just trying to pivot, you know. I don't want them to know me too well. Like, so which luggage place are you at?
I didn't ask you boxers or briefs. Like,
neither. Any more?
More than I needed to know. You have shifted. We were just talking about this. We're both starting a new series that's over a decade after the old one ended. You went from 1 POV character to 4 in Iron Gold, and now you're up to 5?
Well, I just figured 4 wasn't enough. Why make it, so easy? Let's go with 5, with the smartest person in the solar system, and see if I can write that person. That was so easy, yeah.
Are you gonna go the full George R. R. Martin and just keep it?
I think it's going to be 19 next time, yeah. Because 800 pages isn't enough. I mean, I've told this book is a rat killer, right? Quick question, how many of y'all have read Dark Age? Show of hands. All right, so if we get to the Q&A section and you see those people, keep your hands up. No, don't be timid. If you see these people with their hands up and they start asking a spoilery question, summon the inner Severo and give them a good old kidney shot. All right? Because you want to keep the spoiler free.
I'm only up to chapter 5, and I've already had one of those, oh man, like death scenes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about Darrow, man. Yeah.
It was his time.
Yeah, it's time. That mosquito bite, you know, Lyria doesn't get enough. I mean, the dissemination of technology in sci-fi, I think, is way too broad. You know, I think it's really hard to get goods to the front, so the anti-malarial medications. Yeah, I didn't expect them to die from a mosquito bite either, but I thought, let's make some realism. I watched one too many Cormac McCarthy movies.
He planned for literally everything else.
Yeah, so. Yeah. Well, the mosquitoes in the Red Rising world are the size of pelicans. It's like Minnesota.
The unknown's got to worry about. So you don't outline?
Well, okay.
Or you've been trying?
I try real hard. So for Dark Age, I came up with a 30-page outline. The broader points I stuck to, but I think that it's very difficult because these are POV books, right? They're first-person perspective. And the reason I like that for Red Rising is because when I first sat down to write it, I tried third-person and it just didn't pop for me. And then I tried first-person, and it was about the immediacy. It was sort of that tunnel vision that you had when you're in Darrow's POV. Plus, it was the ability to use his method of speech, you know, which is very different. I mean, that's not how I normally write. So Darrow's way of talking is not how I'd write. It would make very complicated emails if I was like that, you know, rage stats. But I think that, you know, making it that, keeping your nose to the ground like that makes it very interesting. And it is almost contradictory then to make an outline, because an outline is too omniscient, too omnipotent. Instead, then the characters are obeying the outline, obeying the plot, and the plot is deciding for the characters as opposed to that unpredictable nature of where the characters are deciding the plot. So part of a way to like really understand that is, if we're thinking about how I'm writing through something, and you know, say just on Darrow's POV, then I'm almost not even thinking about what the secondary characters are doing, or more importantly, what his enemies are doing, and that then makes a book that is completely stacked with reactionary characters, which is uninteresting. Because if I'm going to the effort of saying these characters, these villains, are the apex of humanity, you know, they are intelligent, they are experienced, well, then they're not necessarily reacting to the main character, are they? They're planning ahead. So what I'm doing is, when I write these scenes, and I get to a moment where I think, oh, okay, well, what would the Jackal be doing now? What would Atalante be doing now? What would the Sovereign be doing at this point? And then I almost sort of unwind it. So I get to that point, and I'm like, this is too easy for Darrow. And that's why first drafts are fun for me, because it's sort of this blitzkrieg, and then I get to a point where I realize it's too easy, and then I backtrack and then start planting all the seeds, and start seeing what the secondary and tertiary characters are doing to affect the main character and the overall plot. So it's almost like, my first drafts take me nine months usually, about probably 4 times longer than the rest of 3 drafts combined do, because I'm relayering as I go. So I'll get to a point and then backtrack, because I'm not planning, but it makes it more exciting, it makes it more kinetic, I feel.
See, so it's just 2 ways of getting to the same place then, because what you're essentially saying is that your first draft is your outline.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll write an outline that's 150 pages,
I'll
go
through
the exact same process that you do of, this is what this character feels, this is what this character's, like, what their motivations are, this is what they would do in all of these situations, and I sort of work out the whole story without worrying about the prose and without worrying about, like, the you know, tactile parts of it.
And here's the difference. I can't know what my character's thinking until I write the prose. So until I'm actually in their head writing it, almost like, because it's like a journal, right? It's almost like this live action diary. And so I don't know what my character's thinking. I can't sink into it as much as you can in an outline. And I think that's because until I'm really pacing it out, until I'm getting into the emotion, until I'm caring about it, I don't know. And so it is this 2 ways getting to the same place. And it is really an outline, because, you know, the first draft is about, for me, is hammering out the plot points of the main character. Second draft is about getting the thematic resonance of the main character, the circularity of the logic, right? making all the themes connect, making connect to the action. Third draft is then secondary characters. Fourth draft is overall themes. And I just layer it out that way because it makes sense to me. Or I don't plan it that way, it just always happens that way.
So it's like, this is the thing where like everyone writes differently and there's no right or wrong way to do it because it's the way your brain works. And so, you know, I'll work out like the technical aspects of the story first, figure out the plot, figure out where all the character's gonna end up. And then when I write the actual prose, then well, how does the character feel about this as it's happening? Like, what is their emotional reaction to the things that I already know are gonna happen? And so, like, I layer an emotional layer on top of that, like, cold skeleton, but we get to the same place.
But here's the thing, I feel alienated by that cold skeleton. I feel as though it's, because I try to put down an outline and I almost feel myself disinterested. So it's like I have to force myself to make the outline. The outline, it's only 30 pages, could take me 2 months, and it doesn't make any sense, but I could write 100 pages in 2 months. And it's more fun, and so it's because I lack that exploration.
You are laboring under the delusion that work should be fun.
I've been told that before. It doesn't end up being fun, it ends up being excruciating. But
writing is my job, I'm at work. Like I'm not here to have fun.
Well, I have many years yet to be disillusioned. Hopefully soon. God, think how dark the books will be then. No one will survive. Except for Sophocles, because he can't kill the fox.
I just think, I have my fun in that outlining stage when I'm coming up with all that stuff. But then, like, that next section is it's more work and less fun, but I think that it gets me to a place where I'm satisfied with work. You still have some joy in your life. I'm not going to take that from you. I know your career is foundering. Maybe when you stop having fun, it'll pick up.
Maybe.
So let's talk about the book a little bit.
Okay.
Things are a mess going into Dark Age.
Why do you say that? I mean, they have them right where they want them.
You know, it seemed like
Darrow's made so many good decisions up to this point.
Do you feel like entering into Dark Age? We won't talk about what happens in Dark Age. Do you feel like entering into Dark Age, it was worth it for Darrow? Do you feel like the solar system is a better place after the Rising than it was before? Do you think EO would be proud?
God, it's so complicated because when you say EO would be proud, so I wrote the books and then my friends gave me a dog and named it EO. So now when I'm going through Darrow's perspective, like, I love EO, and I'm like, I do too. Fortunately, in a far different way. No, but I think it's the same thing of like, I look at it this way in a metaphor. If you are starting to reorganize your house during spring cleaning and you stop halfway, that's going to be a pretty shitty house, right? You got to finish the task. The problem is Darrow made all his decisions in Iron Gold because he thought he could finish the task in one blow. And I think that was that was the misperception that he had. Because think about it, for 10 years he has been a war god. He is literally to 8 billion people the Messiah. And that does not brook a lack of confidence. If anything, he has been the point of the spear. He has been, or tip of the spear. He has led the rebellion, led the physical conflict. And then he sees jumped up people who have not been a part of the conflict giving him orders back home who have a misinterpretation of the enemy, not understanding the enemy's resolve. But I think that that's something that is symptomatic with the civilians leading a military. I think civilians should lead a military. I think it's one of the benefits of our system in the United States. And that's how the Roman Republic broke down. And Darrow is simply in Iron Gold making decisions because he wants to get the life that he was promised. He wants to be a father. He wants to be a husband. And he thinks that by virtuosity of arms, he can do that. And unfortunately, he's proven wrong, but he doesn't actually fail if you look at Iron Gold. He still gets his mark, right? But the problem was he was fooled. And Darrow, if you look at it, has never been great with long-term strategy. He's tactics. He's always been tactics. But strategy wins wars, tactics wins battles. And he cannot lose a battle, but he keeps losing the war. And so I think it's frustration, I think it's exhaustion, I think he's not happy with where he is, but I think that creates then the desperate act. And I think that he thinks he can end it with one blow. The problem is he's created a new generation of golds who grow up and their sole purpose in life is to prove themselves worthy, to gather that almost impossible, unnameable virtue of golden society, which is auctoritas, which is authority by virtue of success, which is what dominated the Roman Republic, is this idea that your authority comes only from the things you accomplish in this temporal life, right? Not by birth. Birth sets you up, but then you gotta succeed. And Darrow, unfortunately, has now created a generation whose sole purpose is to kill him. So everyone is fighting is better. Everyone is used to his tactics. Everyone is training for him. And I think it's just a different ballgame. And old dogs, new tricks, you know?
Well, he's always been the grand gesture guy. Like every situation he's in, it's like the solution is a zany scheme. And if your zany scheme fails, then you need an even zanier scheme.
Yeah.
Oh, well, my fleet is going down. I'm just going to launch myself through space into the cockpit of the enemy ship. And
You're saying you wouldn't do that?
It works.
I never heard Red Rising described as zany before. Oddly it fits. No, it is. It's true
It
because.
takes the superhero approach of hit it till it breaks.
And many reasons that's why I decided to write this trilogy is because the first 3 books were about those zany schemes. It's about the archetypes we know. That plucky rebellion, as plucky as Severo taking scalps and tongues can be. But, like, literally, this is the only rebellion I think I've ever seen which castrates them. They're still the good guys. Like, you know what I mean? They're violent and horrifying people. But we all view them as good guys, right? It's because they're embracing the archetypes we all know and love. The entire point of me writing this trilogy is about indicting that. Not saying it's wrong, because I think that it's wrong when you do a follow-up trilogy and then you undermine the successes, undermine the sacrifices, undermine the deaths and the hardships, the first one, and then dilute it and say that doesn't matter because now we have new characters, new events. That's not what I'm trying to do. The entire point of this trilogy is to assess, look at, and challenge the thesis of the Rising. And challenge that zaniness, that pluckiness. All those things used to work. They don't work now. But does the same thesis stand? That marginalized people can make a difference. And so that's why, you know, Iron Gold, there is no antagonist. The only antagonist is Darrow. From all 3 perspectives besides Darrow's, and even Darrow's perspective, he's the main antagonist. That's why it's a frustrating book. It's why it's a disillusioning book. Because it's basically positing a thesis of like, was this all fucking wrong? Right? But the question is then, and the proof in the pudding will be, if these other 3, how these other 3 characters react. Do they come to Darrow's side? Do they find their own path, you know, the Rising was correct? Do they become enemies of Darrow? Does Darrow abandon the idea of a dream of Io? Does he abandon the thesis? And if he does that, then the thesis was wrong, because it can't stand up to scrutiny. And in our own world, I think the benefit of living in a country like America is you've seen that thesis challenged. You've seen our system of governance challenged. We're seeing it challenged. And the point of this series is, does it stand up? And if it does, then it's the right thesis. And so that's kind of why I wrote this series.
So
I'm just going to answer whatever question you ask the way I want.
you still don't know if he was proud. So building on that, we talked about this a little bit at Comic-Con last year. In Iron Gold, Lyria was in some ways like a frustrating character to read because she's the only one that doesn't have agency. All of the other characters are like giant killing machines, and she's the helpless one.
But also think of it like this. All the other characters are just shitting on her. I'm not saying that like in a funny way. They're literally, she's just taking it from all the other characters you're like interested about, right? Everything they've done fucks her life up. And that's the point of it, right?
Yeah. She shows you parts of the world that you could never see through the privileged eyes of the Golds.
Yeah.
And she shows that the broken chains serve the Reds no better than the whole chains. Unbroken chains.
Glad you thought that one through.
It sounded really good when I
know. I felt it too.
But the idea is, like, she shows us, like, why the Rising failed in some ways.
Yeah.
Why it failed the people that it was there to help in the first place. Can you tell us a little bit of where she's going in this next book?
Great question. Without giving anything away, no. No, it is a good question because Lyria can be read in many different ways, and you know, with as interactive as his fan base is, I have people who are frustrated at Lyria, who are annoyed and want to skip to Darrow's chapters, and other people who find some sort of connection to her because they feel like they embody her, or that she embodies their lives and their experiences. But think of it this way. If for instance, I gave you all POVs, Severo, Victra, Mustang, and Darrow in the series, doesn't that then contradict the whole thesis of the series, which is about marginalized people mattering? And instead you're just giving you the titans who are stepping on everything and damn the casualties, damn the collateral damage. Lyria is the collateral damage, so instead it's about how does she discover agency? And that's the second book.
Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited to read. So
And how does she? Well, you have to read. Buy my book. Sam Sykes. Yeah.
You were talking a little bit about Roman history there. Clearly, like even to someone who hasn't studied ancient history, like there's a lot of ancient history in your books. How have you studied and what has that done to influence your writing?
Well,
Is Darrow Caesar?
if you read Rubicon, maybe. Because, never mind, I won't get that deep. It's hard because, okay, I love ancient history so much, it's hard to know how deep a dive I should go. Because sometimes you want to go too much fidelity to, like, the plot arc or the thematic arc that you're trying to match with Roman history or Greek history. I mean, the entire series was conceived of because I was reading Greek plays, not Roman plays, which is interesting, and that's why I chose to, showcase to a degree how Rome's bastardized 300 years of Greek history, right? Or 300 years of Greek mythology, actually 500 years of Greek mythology. And so it started with Antigone, was supported then by the Republic, and then the tone is very much the Iliad in many ways. So it's constantly reinforced by Greek history and Roman history, and particularly the rise and fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbons. But you can also see parallels between the Byzantine Empire and the Roman Empire, and the Rim and the core society and how they differentiate. But I try to make this its own story, not follow beat for beat. However, a lot of the characters were inspired to a degree by let's say the themes that were prevalent within Roman society, which is the idea, like I mentioned before, of auctoritas, which is through the patrician families, the most important thing you could do was rise to high office. Now, the thing is, it was a cannibalistic society, and I say that because you can only be a consul, which is kind of the chief appointment, for 1 year. And after consul, the best appointment you could get is to be a governor of a province. And the reason it was good to be a governor of a province is because as consul, after you were done with your time, you couldn't be prosecuted in office, but you could be prosecuted by the next person in office for what you did as consul. So what did that do? It created a parity. It made sure that you weren't being too tyrannical. It made sure you weren't changing from a tradition too much. So everyone wanted to be then appointed to a governorship, a governorship, because then they would basically manipulate the tax system and skim the cream off the top and become billionaires while they're a province for 4 years and come back and be unassailable because they were so rich. That was the system. But the problem is, being Romans were at the same time, they would make fun of people who tried to get, if you're an old man and successful, like Marius, who was one of the most, Gaius Marius was one of the most important figures in society. At 60 years old, he'd been consul 6 times, and he re-entered the sphere of politics, and he was made fun of for it. Mocked. He went out to the training grounds, the gymnasium, started training again, and everyone stood up and jeered him, even though he'd won 2, 3 successive wars for the Roman Republic. But he was mocked because there's this parity aspect in Roman society. No one wants someone else getting higher than them or too high, because it constantly knocked them down. And then he got back in, 7th-term consul, but it almost invalidated him. It made him less cool. Does that make sense? Because it made him like, oh, he's an old man playing at the new white guy's tricks. But at the same time, they made fun of him for buying his huge estate near this oyster field because they thought he was just going to go fat on oysters and become like a Philistine, a Greek, And so the thing is, in Roman society, it was so competitive. Even when you got to the top office, you couldn't win. And that's what is interesting about the Gold Society. Even when you get to that top office, you can't win. So they really did inspire the idea behind the Golds, backed up by Plato's Republic. But that kind of cannibalistic society is what I wanted to explore. And, obviously Darrow was my way in. Sorry, long answer.
No, that's good. So this book was a little late.
Are you just showing off because you're on time all the time?
I say this as a fantasy author. Like we're late. Like late for us is on time. And your delay was 6 months. Like that's enough.
Well, we
Right?
had
Like,
one delay, and then 2 delays, and then my editor's over there in the lovely red dress, and I asked her, could I do 3 delays, and there was a 10-second pregnant pause, and I was like, I think I can get it on time, and she says, I think that'd be good.
So this is the question. What made you feel like you needed more time with this book? What made you think that it was going to be as easy as the other ones were? You know, this is something we were talking about just a few minutes ago.
So the lack of, I mean, I had an outline for this, but the problem is I kept wanting to explore things. And as Trisha told me, I was with Ephraim's POV. I ended up making it like a Russian novel. Like I really think Ephraim's POV was like 500 pages or something at one point. The book is 800 pages. And so I just started doing like deep diving and literally doing like an anthropological survey of 4 of the colors through Ephraim's eyes, who's constantly jaded and making jokes about everything. So all told, there are probably 200 pages of Ephraim jokes about other colors, which is a little racist. But overall, it was the constant expansion. I really wanted to dive deeper into the world, which as a fantasy author you know well, right?
Yeah.
So how do you maintain pace as well as expanding world? Because this book oscillates between huge scope and then intimacy. And so like when I was writing it, I couldn't figure out how to do it, but near the end, Trisha helped me out, and I started thinking of myself more as the Eye of Sauron. Like, here's how. Not that I'm evil. But it's like that spotlight, you know, you're like, instead of, this is why I got out of Darrow's POV, one of the reasons is you're literally following the action around like this. Instead of trying to give equal credence to each character and trying to split it up like, this chapter is Lyria, this chapter is Ephraim, this chapter is Darrow, trying to get balance. Instead I was following the action around, following the story around, and telling it through then the POVs. So the beginning of the book is basically, the first third is just 2 POVs oscillating back and forth. And then it pops over to like 5 chapters of one POV, seed it with one, another one, and then 5 chapters of this POV, and then 6 chapters of the one where I only had one. So it's basically learning how to use POVs in a different way, which is difficult because I wrote each POV by itself. So I did them one at a time and then pieced them together like some sort of jigsaw puzzle. And so that's, yeah, I know. Because why would you do that? Because what's more important to me is that each POV sounds like that character and is written like them, as opposed to making the plot work. Because I can make the plot work in the next draft. So this is my first draft, right? This first draft took probably 10 months, Trisha, you think? Yeah. And so it was because I was doing, I first wrote Darrow, then I think I wrote Lysander, then I wrote Ephraim, then Mustang, then Lyria, or maybe Lyria, then Mustang. And then I matched them all up because it was more important to maintain that fidelity of perspective. And I thought that that was more true. And then the problem was, then I saw what they all look like together, and I'm like, holy shit, why didn't I do it Pete's way?
Well, this is the thing, when you have a lot of POV characters, if each one has their own story arc within the larger story, syncing them up so that they all, for lack of a better term, climax at the same time.
Well, here's the problem with multiple POVs, right? If you have them, like the traditional structure with Darrow is, you have a fun prologue, you have an inciting incident around page like 30, then you have the catalyst, then you have the inciting incident, then the first act begins with something shocking, or the first act ends with something shocking, then you have the middle thing, which is just putting obstacles in front of the character, then you have a twist. This is like basic Hollywood structure, right? Then you have the third act, kind of all's lost moment, then you have the climax, then you have the denouement, and well, with Darrow you have like a slaughter at the end, But that's a predictable structure. The problem is with 4 POVs or 5 POVs, you can't do that at the same time, because then you have 5 POVs climaxing within 30 pages. Now that sounds like a lot of fun to me. But the problem is that makes for a very uneven book, and this isn't a thriller where you're just reading for that ending, how you're speed reading and skimming until you get to that real twist because that's the only thing that counts. So more important to me is figuring out how do you balance it. But here's the problem. With the way I try to write books is I think there's 3 arcs that matter. I think there is the action kinetic arc, the physical arc, which is the battles, physical conflicts, the enemies. I think there's the internal arc, which is basically how the character feels, their highs and lows. And then there's the thematic arc, which is basically what's the point of the book. What's the circularity of themes, what's being proven. And you're weaving that with one character, right? But when you have 5 characters, you're technically weaving 15 arcs. And I think that having them then spacing them out, and that's based all on feel, so you have to make them all timed right so that you have mini climaxes along the way, because you want the whole thing to be enjoyable, right? And I think that takes a lot more time than I thought it would, and a lot more practice, if you know what I mean. I'm just saying, you gotta be a Renaissance man out there. He's checking the time.
It's a good time to start asking questions.
Have we climaxed yet?
I need a cigarette. Okay, we're gonna take questions.
It's the same question my mom asked. No, I'm not even kidding. She read Red Rising and the EO thing happened, and she was like, "Where did you learn all this?" I don't know. Move around 8 times, you feel a sense of alienation. Little did all my classmates know what I was really thinking.
So, hi Pierce.
Hey, brother.
So from your writing, obviously you're really into military history. You read a lot about battle strategy and everything like that. And one thing that I pick up is that you seem to be really interested in like the camaraderie, the psychology of battle, and just like military lifestyle in general. So I've been curious, have you had any connection to the military? I mean, I assume from your bio, you don't mention anything about ever having served, but was there a time when you were interested in serving, and why didn't you, if you were interested? Do you have close friends who have served?
Yeah, so we have a long history of service in my family, and I, for some reason, chickened out, credit being 18. And the thing is, a lot of my friends did, a lot of the people I went to high school with, a lot of friends in college, but I think that, any team-based activity is essentially the same thing. The problem is, the thing is, the military is just it's exponential returns. It's the most concentrated team activity ever, filled up with tons of alienation and hurry up and wait, right? So it's frustration. Yeah, we know one military person. Yeah, it's tons of frustration. It's 99% filling your time between like activities or shifts. And so I think that it's reading a lot. I mean, one of my favorite things when I read when I was 14 is this kind of family heirloom that was passed down. It's this book called Between Two Flags, which showed basically first-hand letters and accounts of battles and the Civil War between Confederates and Northern forces, and it's literally there just depictions of the battles and of the time between the battles, which was filled up most of the pages. And seeing how the human psychology hasn't changed at all, I think is what's reflected in these books, is that the people are still people, they're still only worried about their friends. Most of them describe PTSD as coming from the ability not to do more than what they actually did. So it's not like the violence they perpetrated, it's the inability to stop the things that happened that were bad. And I think it's that sense of futility which these books capture, as well as some, kinetic action and stuff. But it's one of those things, like you get really insecure a lot of times when you're writing military history, or military fiction, because, I've never been in a firefight, and yet I'm writing Interstellar War, and then when, one of my buddies is a Navy SEAL and he says I capture it well, I'm like, no, but I take that as a compliment. It's the same thing as like, I think it was like tweeted at me like a year ago that James Comey was reading Red Rising. It was on his bedside table, and I'm like, okay, so the director of the FBI is reading about me writing about terrorists. I'm like, well, I feel like I'm bullshitting. But at the same time, he's still reading it, so it's kind of like you overanalyze it, and you project too much. So I think it's about being true to the characters and the relationships, and realizing that, yeah, the big ideas are great, the ideas of fighting for freedom and liberty, but really it comes down to the person right beside you. But I think it's that in almost any endeavor, but military more so. So it's a lot of different things culminating.
Pierce, how do you view the fandom's general dislike of Lysander?
Well, I would hope that they would dislike an inborn racist, because he's a product of his culture. The problem is he's like a noble racist, which is a tricky thing, right? Because often we idolize these people in history, and we have. If you look at a lot of the people in history, Genghis Khan we idolize now, but he's a mass murderer, right? Alexander the Great killed millions of people. We worship the wrong people. We worship the murderers in history. The thing is, now we're in Lysander's POV, and it's easier to hate him. If we were on third person with Lysander, I guarantee you 90% of the people would like him. If we only saw him through Darrow's perspective, people liked him, because people liked him as a kid. this is how it works, because now we see the rationalization, we also see the privilege he comes from, we also see how hard his childhood was, which makes him relatable to a degree, but also he's a bastard because he really does think that humans, he has a superiority complex, which he is smarter than everyone else. He is more gifted than everyone, but he presumes that dictates that he's more human than them, which is the fatal flaw. Because humanity isn't derived from intelligence or skill sets, it's derived from you having sentience. And that's something he doesn't understand yet. And it makes sense that people will dislike him, I would hope so. In fact, I'd be more concerned if people liked him. That said, he is a very fun character to write, who I don't think is wrong based on his upbringing. I just think his upbringing was so fucked up he can't escape it. So the question is, can he?
So you mentioned Greek, classics. Was there, and then the Greeks created theater. Was there any piece of theater that has inspired you over the last couple of years, or anything that has moved you in a certain way?
No. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things. I think it's, I live in LA, and our source of theater is a little bit depleted compared to New York's. So I think that most of my inspiration still comes from books, not theater. I also often fall asleep in theater, but I do oddly like opera. I know, it's crazy because I love opera for the first 40 minutes, and then I nap for the next 30. Then by intermission, I come back and I have a shot of whatever's at the bar. Usually it's during winter time, so I get a hot toddy, and I come back and I'm like, I love the second half, But I'm not kidding. I've probably seen 15 operas, and I fall asleep in every single one, but I love going. But it's literally being able to drift into Tristan and Isolde and play with the themes, because Red Rising is about scope and sound and noise and fury, right? And what's more furious than opera? What's more demonstration of the volume of human emotions than opera? I think sometimes for me, plays are a little too cute, and so they don't inspire me as much. I enjoy them, I can enjoy them, but I don't take ideas from them as much. That said, I did see King Lear done by the Shakespeare Company with Ian McKellen 4 years ago in Malibu at the Getty Villa, so it was all Greek surroundings, and it was awesome. I mean, the only thing that was a little weird was Ian McKellen nude in the Pacific Ocean right there. I mean, it challenged my preconceptions of Gandalf. You always take the wizard's staff!
To talk about Lysander, I do have to ask, do you have a favorite poem?
I do. Great question. You've seen someone murder some people. I love the Rudyard Kipling poem, "The Cities, Thrones, and Powers Stand in Time's Eye." I think that's beautiful. I also love the Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. I think it's one of the most beautiful things. Edgar Allan Poe, his wife died when she was very young. Actually, he married her when she was very young too. So there's some real duality there. But anyway, she perished when she was young, and he wrote a poem called, Love Song to Annabel Lee about the Ballad of Annabel Lee. Love song? Ballad? I don't even know my own favorite poem. But about her dying, living in the sepulcher by the sea, and the angels stole him. The angels from heaven were jealous of their love, so they stole her away from him. And I love that feeling of indignation at the loss of a loved one. And that really kind of helped me inspire Darrow to a degree, is the indignation of his young love being stolen away. And I thought it was very beautiful, and I think it's some of the best prose. I think there's also mermaids in it, so I love that. Flexing guy, yeah. I love how you did the one thing no one else is doing.
Hi, huge fan of the book series, me and my brother here. I'm inspired by myself, that's not the point. But you can buy my book later. Me and my brother, I had an argument with him. I want to know, Tactus, one of my favorite characters, you killed him mad about that. I want to know, did you think that had Tactus survived into the Rising and found out that Darrow was a Red, you think that he would have joined him? I feel that he would have minded.
Yeah, I don't think your brother does. I literally see his head moving in the audience.
Someone here disagrees.
Oddly, okay, so I think yes, the question, he would have joined Darrow because he'd been alienated by his own society. The question is, how strong would that fidelity have been? How strong would that trust have been? Would he have defected later on? That's the question. I think he would have yes for a little while, but would he still 10 years later? I don't know. Whereas, Lauren Arcos, if you told him right off the bat, Lauren would have just cut his head off. So Tactus, I think for a while, because Tactus never been given that second chance, but as Tactus grew up and evolved, I'm not sure. I think that grip that Apollonius had over psychology is pretty strong. And you've met Apollonius, so, guys, yeah. So I think that Apollonius did a pretty good psychological number on him. But that would have been really fun to explore, and it's one of those FOMOs I have. Like, I really would like to explore that more, but, I have bloodthirsty editors who agree with the slaughter I sometimes put on the page.
Who inspired Victra for you?
That's a really romantic question. Well, she's blushing.
Considering I have a girlfriend now and we don't talk about past relationships, I'm gonna take the fifth on that. Moving on. I'm literally turning purple over here.
What's up, Pierce?
Hey man, how you doing? Good Ragnar beard, I love it.
Yeah. Shout out to Hirgla Ragnar.
Yeah.
Two quick questions. Who or what inspired you to write Darrow? Because I think we can all agree he's one of the most captivating characters we've ever read about in a book series.
Go
And
on,
also,
keep going. No.
Also, Rubicon, recommend or highly recommend?
Highly recommend. I'm rereading it right now. It's amazing. One, because Rubicon's a book by Tom Holland. It's a deep dive into basically the thesis is that Julius Caesar brought about the Dark Age incidentally. So it traces the fall of the Roman Republic, why it did, the endemic things and systematic things, which protected the Republic for a long time. That parity I was talking about is no one got to rise too high without getting their head cut off, basically, or getting expelled, and how Caesar changed that. But also the people that presented. All right, so Mustang, for instance, in Dark Age and in Iron Gold, is reticent to do the things is reticent to take more action than the executive branch is granted within the compact of the society, directly because of the people that set the stage for Julius Caesar to seize. Well, he didn't technically. Okay, Caesar and Augustus to seize the proverbial throne of power in Rome. Romans were for a long time suspicious of kings ever since Tarquinius got kicked out 700 years before Augustus, or 500 years before Augustus. So they were always skeptical of kings, and always skeptical of one person rising higher above the rest, like the tall poppy thing, right? And so Mustang knows exactly that it was Sulla and Marius, this generation, that allowed Romans, soldiers, for instance, Sulla went into Rome with an army when he lost politically one time, and that set the stage for Julius Caesar 30 years later to basically cross the Rubicon, which ended Western republics and democracies, the idea of it. So that's a fantastic book. What was the other question?
Who or what inspired you to write
Darrow
Darrow?
was built up because of pent-up frustration with, you guys all know this scene in a movie where the main character, the protagonist, and the villain are dueling, and the villain loses because, the villain loses and then falls down and is beaten, and then the main character turns their back on them, and then the villain lunges up, and then the main character kills them, right? That's done to keep the moral slate clean, because that's what Hollywood needs of its heroes. I think that's what the mass market needs of its heroes, is that they want the villain to die. We need that catharsis, but at the same time, we need to make the main character not a reptile, not cruel. And my concept was, that's denying reality, and it's also not challenging anyone. So the first thought was basically, how do I make a character who kills the villain when they're on the ground? Who basically perpetrates evils in the name of good and then struggles with that. And so I wanted to create a villain who was the antithesis of everyone I'd seen. When Bond always kills the villain but never is blamed for it. I wanted the cold-blooded assassin who has a good reason, and I wanted the audience to struggle with it and to see whether or not we still like the guy. And so everything else, all his personality, the EO stuff, that's based on Antigone. So EO came first, then there was Darrow, because EO is the foundation of Red Rising, is that emotion behind it, is Antigone, 2,500-year-old story about a girl defying the cold power of authority, and who does she leave behind? How does someone come to terms with the person they love more than anything in the world, loving something more than them, loving an idea more than they love them. And I've been in relationships where someone has liked something or loved something more than they loved me, and that dissonance is shocking. It rocks your world. And I was coming out of a relationship like that, so I funneled a lot of that into Darrow combined with the idea I just told you about. So it really began more thematically than in terms of the world coming first. So first there was Eo, then there was Darrow, then there was his character, then there was you pull the feet on Mars. And that's literally the pacing that it came with. Then the whole world came later. Plato's Republic I applied later on. Good question.
Speaking of Darrow.
I'm glad they let you off the claw drill for a little while. We'll be doing casting next week. You gotta come by.
I had a question about that. I'm not gonna talk about that. Speaking of Darrow, what inspired the idea behind his paradigm shifting ability and like that whole concept as a whole, leading to him eating or feeding most people throughout?
You're literally gonna laugh. It's simply in a scary movie, when someone feels like they're being hunted, I'm like, you dumb motherfucker. Just run. Run any direction. Because if you're stalking someone through the woods or through a house and they just run in a different direction, like shit, like where are they now? Now the hunted becomes the hunter. And I really just think, like, I never feel uncomfortable, I just run away. And then I hide behind a corner, I'm like, where are they? It's just that emotion. It's like, do something. And so Darrow always just does something. It's not always right, but he's always doing it.
So there was no underlying psychology or any science behind that?
I mean, I'd like to pretend that I'm a genius. To a degree, I mean, there is. Okay, so part of that spawns, it's somewhat, all tied together, because part of it comes from golds being able to live so long. So they're a martial culture that can live to like 140, 150 maybe even. And because of that, they can live in such splendor, but they also value the deeds you can accomplish in this life. They also value putting themselves in harm's way. That there is constantly tug and pull of like wanting to do the badass thing, but also wanting to survive. It's basically this entire idea can be summed up in the beginning of Golden Sun, where Darrow is forbidden to launch himself at at Karnas's ship. And because he's shut down there, because Gold's be like, no, that's stupid. There's probably a 30... Zany. It's a zany idea. It's a zany idea with only a 13% probability of success. He's the anti-Vulcan, right? So these people won't do anything that jeopardizes the possibility of living 120 more years of cool life with tons of pinks and great food. And so I think it's literally a cost-reward thing. So what you have as a culture that was based on iron golds, based on autoritas, based on everything you can do in this world, what you can accomplish, and your deeds echoing through time, right? Like you're shouting to the wind, like Karna said, and at the same time they get to lose so much more than any of the other colors that they die. And that's what's kind of ossified and poisoned their society. That's what's made them that's what's increased this largesse and made them soft, because their lives are so awesome, so they protect them. Darrow literally has only his mission to live for. And so he's able to risk himself and change things more often. I think he challenges preconceptions because he's also more willing to let people die behind him. And because of that, these things that aren't necessarily noble, he's able to do noble things, which is what makes it interesting, because no character is interesting to me unless they're at war with himself. So if Darrow can do things painlessly, easy, well, why is that paradigm? It doesn't have something bad happen. Well, then why did the paradigm exist? So this whole Dark Age he did, this whole thing that's happening, that was always a possibility, right? It's like having robots. That's why Nero was afraid of robots. It might make the world better, but it would probably make it worse. And it's the same with Darrow. He's shaking it all up, and we'll see what comes out the other side.
Considering the books are written in first person, and Mustang was inspired by your mother, was it ever weird writing sexual or romantic?
You had to do it. You had to do it. Yeah. You know what's even weirder? When someone asks that question, my mom's in the room. She's not here today. It happened in LA, and I was just like, oh God. I mean, okay, so Mustang was not like, she was inspired by my mother simply because of her intellectual scope, but it was also like two things are about Mustang that remind me of my mom. It's her intelligence, but also a combination of intelligence, that incisive, razor sharp wit, but also her humanity. And Mustang, the thing that attracts Darrow to her, the thing that attracts him to Roke, and even Cassius, is their humanity. is that fundamental sort of kindness to them that no one else really sees, and Mustang has it more than anyone else. So my mom was really smart, and she was a family of 10 growing up in Iowa on a truck driver's salary. Her mom died when she was 7, her dad remarried, and 5 new kids were brought into the family, and then she put herself through college and graduated in 2 years, 3 degrees, and was one of the first women to run a TV station in the country. And so all this from, applause. So that to me was really impressive, right? And also seeing, her dad didn't like that. She did all that, and her dad resented her for it. He resented because he didn't do anything with his life, and she did so much with hers, and he didn't need her. And so that's kind of the Mustang dynamic with Nero, that kind of thing. Now, all the other stuff, the sexy stuff, not my mom. So get that Oedipus complex out of your mind. I've read the Theban plays, I'm not trying to live them.
I think we got time for maybe one more question.
Okay, so it's been bothering me since I've read the first book, and I know you describe what a razor looks like and like kind of how it moves and stuff, but throughout the book series, I've imagined it as like the metal guy from Terminator, but also like a snake spinal cord sort of thing. I don't know what it is.
Have you ever seen an Indian urumi? Well, I can't believe that's the case. An Indian urumi is an 11th century Indian fighting weapon. Naturally, Indian, of course, the subcontinent. It basically looks like an attached. Oh, she already Googled it, man. Wait, what's your internet provider? It's different for each one. So, obviously there's a hosta on the rim, and in the core it's very different. But basically imagine a semi-solid blade that can wrap around, that looks almost like a snake, but thinner, right? The urumi's not exactly it, so don't take that as canon. But it's a semi-solid thing that can wrap around your arm. Some of them are thinner, some of them are thicker. But they can all get hard. And well, not all. It happens to everyone sometimes. So Darrow's has a little curve like this. I'm sorry, it's a gift that just keeps on giving. All right, so the thing for Terminator is great, like the idea of the metal, but it isn't quite as fluid as that. It doesn't look like liquid mercury, which is what that was based on. It instead it turns into a semi-solid state, which is, oh God, I'm trying to use not the right adjectives, the wrong adjectives. It looked like
So it's like
it looks like an albino serpent.
It's like a snap bracelet, but a sword.
Yeah, like a snap bracelet, but more fluid than that can either wrap around your arm or wrap around your whip. Imagine on your side it looks like a whip with a rigid handle. And when you do this, but the thing is it has a little toggle on it that you can shape it to whatever shape you want it to be. Most people flick it out like that because it's the quickest reaction you can do and it goes straight. Plus that's the formal side. Now obviously, the rim has a little bit different. They do it much longer. It's about 1.5 meters. So it's more like a spear, which is the hosta, which is, Latin fighting weapon, never mind. And then they use it more of the spear and the shadow fall movement, so they start over the top of the head and they come down. Whereas the will away is very different, obviously, but each fighting style is reflective on the type of razor they use. The core has thinner blades and are also quicker to draw, but they also have a slight curve, almost like a katana, whereas the Martians use more of a flat broadsword blade. Not quite as long as, it's longer than a Xephos, like those Greek fighting swords, like the 300, but not as long as a bastard sword that Jon Snow uses. So it's right shorter than that. I know, that's such a fun pun.
You just listed every sword.
No, I have claymores, I have wakatashi, I have sai, I have falchions. But anyway, it's basically different for every part, but the main thing is that it can go from a semi-solid to a solid state. Yeah. And hopefully soon you'll see a physical representation of it. No, don't be pervy about that part. You'll see hopefully soon. Okay. Moving on. Man, this is a minefield. A minefield. Can we do one more so we don't end on that? Right here, yeah. Cool shirt.
I have a very loud voice, it's fine.
Go for it.
What's going on with the TV show?
It's been really great seeing y'all. Thanks for coming out. The TV show. So, in 2014, I sold it to Universal, and I thought I was cool. So I thought a movie was coming out and be awesome. Then I found Hollywood, like reality, right? So I wrote the first couple drafts, and then the script got passed off to someone else, and the whole thing went into what we call development hell, which is basically me sending emails and getting no replies. Fortunately, over a period of time, the rights reverted back to me. I sat on them for 2 years because I thought that, no movie was better than a bad movie. And instead, I started trying to piece together the creative team. And so I found a director, I found the writer, and if you know who they are, don't say their names, please, because we're still keeping it low, because I think it's important to put I don't think we should put the cart before the horse again, because I think that we're in a world that loves announcements, but nothing happens. Instead, I'd like not to be embarrassed again, and for when we announce it should be a success, not a maybe success, not an optioning thing. But we've pieced together the pilot, written it, and we'll be taking it out soon. We have all the financing and all that stuff. We just got to have someone who wants to carry it, which is the network, right? And that's the pitch process. So hopefully in a month or two, we'll have a full announcement. If you hear nothing, it's because I fucked up. Thank you all for coming out.